Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sweden University again. This is our second to last class of the series, The Music and Genius of Benny Carter with Lauren Schoenberg. As usual, I encourage everyone to join the chat available on Vimeo to post questions, comments, and also to get today's handout. To make sure you are watching today's class, I will include a lower third on the screen with today's date and the class. Also remember that Sweden classes are now available to rewatch up to 7 days after airing. And that's all from me for now. Welcome back, Lauren.
Hello, Juan. Good to see you. And hello, everybody out there. Good to see you all. And today, we're going into the fourth part of Benny Carter. And I guess I should have known, it just kind of makes sense, that once you start getting into it, it's hard to get out of it. We're just today going to spend some time in the early 1940s. And my thinking is that we focused in this course, and I realize that sometimes it doesn't quite merge with the descriptions of the 5 classes, although at all times there is an intersection, to go into depth into the first 20 years, 25 years of his career in depth, when he innovated and made the great influence that he did. And then, I talked to Seton Hawkins at Jazz Lincoln Center. We might very well extend the course or do a second part, and then kind of go to what I would call the glory years, where he was set up in Hollywood, played jazz when he wanted to, made some incredible records, and then had this comeback to almost, you might say, a full-time jazz career the last 15 years of his life or so. So that's the story. It's good to see you all. Feel free to text questions, as Juan mentioned, and I'll answer them quickly if they're apropos of what we're talking about. And if they're a more general question, then I can come back to it a little bit later so it doesn't break the flow, as we say. So let me get my screen sharing going here, which I believe is right here. And, oh, sorry, here we go, slideshow. And man, that's so wonderful to hear that. Benny Carter, from an album called I'm in the Mood for Swing, recorded in the mid-1980s. Roland Hanna, Howard Alden, Louis Bellson, and I think it was George Mraz on bass. I was at the session, I should remember. Dizzy Gillespie played some of the tunes, and I will button down the bass player on that session before we leave here tonight. As we get into our fourth part of 5 about the great Benny Carter, once again, in case, because there are people here who just joined for individual classes, and I want to make sure that you all know about these books. In my estimation, one of the best books written, regardless of genre, about a great American artist, tracing their career, putting it in cultural context, also discographical, musicological to a certain degree. But these are just classics. Benny Carter, A Life in American Music, written by Morrow Berger, his son Ed Berger, and James Patrick. It originally came out in the early 80s, and it came out again just around the year 2000, 2001, just a few years before Benny passed. And can't recommend them highly enough. So there you go. The course couldn't have done the course. And I think anybody who does anything on Benny Carter is beholden to this research and these books. And also remembering the great Ed Berger, who taught here at Swing University and who was Benny Carter's right-hand man for many, many, many decades. Well, where we left off last week was just as Benny Carter came back to the United States from his years in Europe. He went there in the summer of 1935, came back in the summer of 1938. And when he left, he was a very well-respected, innovative saxophonist, trumpeter, clarinetist, bandleader, composer, arranger, who had recorded with everybody, played with everybody, but was having trouble keeping his own band together. Was playing in someone else's band. The cards were not set up right for him at that moment. And he figured, why not go to Europe and see what it's like over there? And within a matter of months, he went to Paris. He was being wooed to go to England to write orchestrations for the BBC. And over the course of his 3 years in Europe, as we covered extensively last week, recorded with Django Reinhardt and Coleman Hawkins and led bands and arranged for bands, had an interracial orchestra playing, just all kinds of amazing things happened to him. So when he came back to the States in 1938, it was a very, very different story for Benny Carter than it was when he left in 1935. I'd like to start with this, which is a fascinating recording. Benny Carter, and I should say what we're going to trace today, will be what happened when he came over in 1938 to when he kind of decided to kind of hang up his hat finally and settle in Hollywood, where he became a great movie composer and television eventually, and all kinds of great commercial work and jazz work all at the same time. This photo was taken just as he was settling into Hollywood. He was going to buy a house out there. This was taken in 1945. He still had his big band, but he was based in California. And I will tell you who is in this photo. Benny's on the left. You see his trumpet down there for a moment. Next to the right is Willie Smith, great alto saxophonist who used to be thought of as like one of the great jazz soloists of the era. He was a great, what we call lead alto player in a big band and played good solos too. And he was a great virtuoso. And he's in the middle. There's Willie Smith. Next, going to the right, is Nat King Cole. And Nat Cole and Benny Carter were related musically. They were very close. They had records together, as we're going to hear. But they were both also early artists for an upstart independent record label on the West Coast, for which they had already recorded. It was called Capitol Records. Now, you may know that name if you're into that era and the history of record labels and all that kind of stuff. But Nat Cole and Benny Carter played a huge role in the establishment of Capitol Records. Of course, later came huge hit records for all kinds of great artists, most notably Nat Cole and Frank Sinatra. But Benny was in there from the very beginning. Now, to the right of Nat Cole, way in the back, the guy way in the back, he's obscured, but way in the back is Lester Young. And to the right of Lester Young, close up, in the front, that's the young Charlie Parker, who would have been 24, about to turn 25 years old. Of course, his birthday is coming up very, very, very shortly. And to the right is a man who later wound up producing the Monterey Jazz Festival, Jimmy Lyons. So, believe it or not, there is a recording of this session. And we're going to start. I think it's great to compare Benny with some of his peers, Willie Smith and the great Charlie Parker, who's about to turn everything upside down and then back up again. So Nat Cole's on the piano, and let's listen to this rarity. Benny, I believe Benny kicks it off. Here it is. Oops. Shit, excuse me. Sorry about that. Here we are. Okay, finally. Okay, that's Willie Smith on the alto playing T for Two. And now Benny Carter. Charlie Parker.
Old Trio and Buddy Rich. That did it, gentlemen. That really did it.
That sure did it. Ernie Bubbles Whitman with the announcer there. And, you know, it makes a lot of sense to listen to something like that. First of all, Charlie Parker's birthday is coming up, but also because in confronting or trying to understand the life of Benny Carter, as we've talked about throughout the course, to try and look at it, you know, going ahead, you know, not knowing what's going to happen. And here's Benny Carter in 1945, and he's the king, you know what I mean? And here's this young Charlie Parker. Well, it turns out that a huge influence on Charlie Parker was someone who Benny Carter mentored, and that was Ben Webster. And there's a lot of Ben Webster in some of Charlie Parker's phrasing, among a lot of other folks, including Lester Young. And just to hear them all play together at a moment like when Charlie Parker was like fresh coming out of it, Benny Carter's already, you know, in his mid-30s. And just to hear the sound of those three altos together really helps you understand the greatness of Benny Carter and how he sounded in comparison to Willie Smith and to Charlie Parker. And by the way, for the piano fans out there, if you heard all that busy playing that Nat King Cole was doing, if it sounded like Oscar Peterson, there's no mistake there, because Nat King Cole was, to my ears, the person who Oscar Peterson sounds the most like. And anyway, fascinating music, just to kind of kick us off. Now, we have Benny Carter in Hollywood. The story that we're going to tell tonight is Benny arriving from Europe in 1938, great records that he made, his big band that he put together. We're going to hear them live from the Savoy Ballroom, all-star record sessions that he played on, and then eventually this move, eventually out to the West Coast, from which this recording came. In the early 1940s, he started getting little gigs writing for Hollywood films, and immediately, you know, he's really kind of breaking the color line there. In the first episode, we talked about some of the other folks who had also broken open to African-American artists the studios of Hollywood before Benny Carter, all of whom, of which he was related to, Will Marion Cook and Will Votary and people like that. However, Benny Carter decided he was going to settle in California and he was going to make a career, and he got a few opportunities and he hit them out of the park. And then he had this wonderful career in Hollywood for many years. Well, let's just watch this next great film clip, and then we'll talk about what it was and how it happened. This is 1943.
Goodness knows, honeysuckle rose. When we're passing by, flowers droop and sigh, and I know the reason why. You're much sweeter, goodness knows, honeysuckle rose. I don't buy sugar, you just have to touch my cup. You're my sugar, it's sweet when you stir it up. When I'm taking sips from your tasty lips, seems the honey fairly drips. Your confection, goodness knows, honeysuckle rose. Every honeybee sighs for jealousy when they see you out with me. I don't blame them, goodness knows, you're my honeysuckle rose. When you're passing by, flowers droop and sigh, and I know the reason why. You're much sweeter, goodness knows, you're my honeysuckle rose. Don't buy sugar, you just have to touch my cup. You're my sugar, she's sweet when you stir it up, or when I'm taking sips from your tasty lips. Seems the honey fairly drip. Your confection, goodness knows, you're my honeysuckle rose. You're my honeysuckle rose.
Wow. Okay. From the film As Thousands Cheer, they gave Benny Carter the assignment, and man, did he hit the ball out of the park. There he is, elegant, his tuxedo, his big band, and a color production, Technicolor, 1943. And how about that opening shot of him alone, then with the saxophones, with some of that wonderfully fancy saxophone writing that he was so famous for. Then they play behind the vocal with some great backgrounds. And you see the band for a moment. And you know who one of the trumpeters was? Someone who did a wonderful concert at Jazz Lincoln Center. I also had the opportunity to work with him at the Smithsonian. The late, great Gerald Wilson is in there for a hot moment. You can see him in the big band. But anyway, the point being that this was how Benny Carter made his name and reputation in Hollywood. And they liked him so much, they featured him in a film backing Lena Horne. And he was to become, like Lena Horne, kind of outspoken and tremendously successful at playing the game, however you want to look at it, of surmounting the tremendous racism in the industry at the time, and never surrendering dignity, and actually making a lot of great progress in terms of civil rights at the time. He and Nat Cole were really instrumental in two things. One was buying houses in what they used to call restricted areas in Hollywood in those days. And also eventually Benny, I'm not sure about Nat Cole's participation, I'll have to look it up, but I know that Benny was very involved in the breaking down of the segregated musicians union out in LA. So it was a very, very heady time. Now we're going to go back to 1938 and see how he led up to that Hollywood career. He arrived back in New York, as we mentioned, in 1938, and, you know, had really benefited from being written about by the early jazz critics in England and in France. And here we have a photo of Benny Carter in the early 1940s at the New School for Social Research here in New York City. And they had, you know, a lecture about jazz with two important writers and two, I would say two important musicians. That's almost an understatement when you look at this photograph. On the left is the pioneering French jazz critic and writer, Robert Goffin. And on the right is Leonard Feather, who befriended Benny Carter in England when Benny was over there in 1935, 1936, and remained very close with Benny. And it was the writing that they did about, yes, Louis Armstrong and Benny Carter and the great African-American musicians who in America were not getting a fair shake, even critically for the most part. They wrote about them in the same way that they wrote about any great artist. And it kind of eventually influenced American writing and American criticism to say, Jesus, you know, maybe we've kind of missed the boat on how significant these folks are beyond just sheer entertainment value. So anyway, there's Benny and Louis Armstrong. In the last show, we heard quite a bit of Benny Carter's trumpet playing, which certainly is always reflective of his love for Louis Armstrong's playing. And we're going to hear some of that in this episode. Now, so there we are. Okay. This is a record he made as soon as he came back in '38 with Teddy Wilson and Billie Holiday.
But there's April in my heart again. The devil's got his due, love's holidays through. Love and I have made a happy start again. Though leaves lie on the ground, turned around. It isn't fall at all, you see, it's spring that I have found. There's frost in Central Park. At 5 it's almost dark. What's the difference when you've heard love's sweet amend? There's snowflakes in the sky and geese are flying high, but there's April in my heart again.
Wow. Magic. Teddy Wilson and an orchestra that included Lester Young, among other people. But the soloist there, you heard Benny at the beginning, and that was really kind of like a quintessential Benny Carter solo with a staggering technique, beautiful tone. But, you know, those are just the building blocks, the outer shell of how we talk about the music. And, you know, it's the intrinsic logic and beauty of what he plays. You know, it rhymes. It's like when you hear great prose, you know, it rhymes. He plays a phrase and then he plays another phrase and then another phrase that links back, just like rhyming with words. And just such a beautiful, beautiful feeling. Billie Holiday, Teddy Wilson, of course, who Benny Carter really helped bring to New York City there on the piano. And then a little bit of music from two Texans, Harry James on the trumpet, who was kind of, he was in Benny Goodman's band at that time, beautiful trumpet playing, and then a short solo by the great Herschel Evans, also from Texas. So there you have Benny Carter. He had hardly gotten off the boat from England, and, you know, he was whisked into the studios. Last week, we heard him on a Lionel Hampton record, actually with Herschel Evans and Harry James and Joe Jones, who's on drums here. And, you know, he was back in demand as soon as he got off. Now, a huge plus for him was the fact that, you know, he was so admired that other bands started recording his own, his music, Benny Carter's music, while he was deciding what he was going to do. Was he going to have a small band, a big band? Was he going to go right into the studios? You know, how was he going to confront this new respect and career opportunities that were burgeoning for him in 1938? Well, it was certainly didn't hurt that one of the top bands of the era, Tommy Dorsey's band, decided to record one of the great Benny Carter pieces, and we'll listen to it because most of the music, all the music we're going to hear after these next two tracks are all Benny Carter performances. I think it's good to hear how other bands played his music. It helped him get royalties, it spread his name around, and it certainly introduced his name to a wider public. So let's go to Tommy Dorsey's band in 1938. The photo, for those who are into such things, that's the 1941 Tommy Dorsey band. But the personnel for the 1938 band is right in front of you. And here is Symphony and Riffs. We heard the original 1933 recording a couple of weeks ago. Here's Tommy Dorsey. Well, that was interesting. Uh, Tommy Dorsey's band turning it into like a almost like a Dixieland march or something like that. Wow, that was an unusual interpretation. It's almost like hearing, Stan Kenton's band play, something arranged by Gil Evans. But nonetheless, a wonderful effort, and did so much for Benny Carter to have these major big bands recording his music there. Among the soloists, Lee Castle on trumpet, Dorsey, of course, on the trombone. The clarinet was by Johnny Mintz, and I think there were two tenor solos. That might have been Skeet Herford and Dean Kincaid, if I'm not mistaken. Mo Purtle on drums. Let's go to another Benny Carter track recorded. He wrote a symphony and riffs he had written back in 1933. In this one called Blue Interlude, he had written just about a year later, if I'm not mistaken. Benny Goodman was going to record it in 38. He had played it earlier. But Cab Calloway made a record of it that's really beautiful. And I'm going to play it for you. In Gunther Schiller's book, The Swing Era, he writes at length about Cab Calloway was actually a fine singer. And when I say a fine singer, I think most people associate him with his scat vocals and Heidi, Heidi, Heidi Ho, and all the outrageous things that he did. But he made some lovely records as a singer, and this is one of them. He really, is in tune, and the phrasing is beautiful. That's a nice picture of him looking at the star soloist of this band, which was the great saxophonist Chu Berry. And on the left of that picture, if you can see it, what you're seeing is the back of the bassist. That's why his arm is out akimbo. That's Milt Hinton. Well, let's listen to Cab Calloway, like Tommy Dorsey, giving Benny Carter a leg up just as soon as he came back from Europe, getting his tunes and arrangements out there.
I love you so, want you to know, each hour I'm not with you is a blue interlude. You're part of me, so can't you see? Each time we kiss adieu starts my blue interlude. I never realized I needed you so badly, craved your love so madly, but now I do. All I possess, dear, I would offer gladly to you. Won't you grant me this request before we part? Leave me your heart to guide me on my way through each blue interlude.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful music from Cab Calloway. And how about that tenor saxophone by Chu Berry, who was another one of Benny Carter's disciples. He played so beautifully, made his first great records with Benny Carter in 1933. And when he played that solo, when he got to the bridge, the middle part, was very high on the tenor sax. And it really sounds like he was doing a doing a Benny Carter. The phrasing and the tone was just like Benny, kind of a tribute there. But what a wonderful record. Benny Goodman also recorded Blue Interlude in the summer of 1938 with a Benny Carter arrangement and vocal by Martha Tilton. So, Benny Carter was, just setting the stage for what he was going to do. And what he eventually did was to put together a big band. And we're actually going to listen to, excuse me, a little bit of that big band live from the Savoy Ballroom. But as that was all happening, Benny was back in the studio making all-star jazz records. And if you look at the picture on the left, you'll see two of the people on this recording. There's Roy Eldridge on the trumpet. He has a hat on and a mute in the trumpet. And Billie Holiday's up at the microphone. And they're on this record, along with Benny Carter and Teddy Wilson, and a classic version of Sugar. And we're playing it not only for Billie's great vocal, but of course, for the opening solo by Benny Carter that is just, well, anyway, it's quintessential Benny Carter. Listen to it and come up with your own adjectives.
Maybe my sugar, that sugar baby of mine, he's special ration for me. He never asks for my money. All that I give him is honey, and that he can spend any time. I'd make a million trips to his lips if I were a bee, because he's sweeter than chocolate candy to me. He's confectionery sugar. I never cheat on my sugar, 'cause I'm too sweet on my sugar, that sugar baby of mine.
Classic. That opening solo by Benny Carter, if you remember one in the first class, we listened to a record that Benny said really, or maybe it was the second class, anyway, that Benny said influenced him. I Never Miss the Sunshine, Benson's Orchestra of Chicago with Frankie Trumbauer on the saxophone. And on that opening solo here, this is 1939, early January 1939, there are still vestiges of Frank Trumbauer in Benny Carter's sound and solo. And it just shows how everything comes together. The trumpet solo by Roy Eldridge. Roy, by his own admission, when he was young, he loved to listen to Bix Beiderbecke. So it just shows the, cross racial influences of early jazz in this African-American idiom. Billie Holiday singing, Teddy Wilson on the piano again, and that closing tenor solo, for people who keep track of such things like me, that was Ernie Powell. And he's one of hundreds of musicians of that era that you probably never heard of unless you are really into band personnels and lesser known players. But what a wonderful, wonderful solo that was. By the way, just backtracking now, you remember the first tune that we listened to, the theme song that plays, that comes on when I start the class. And I said I wasn't sure who the bass player was. I thought it was George Mraz, and it was. Just I thought I would tie up that little note because I'll probably get a question about it. We have a couple of questions here, and please, feel free to come in. Someone asked the name of the tune that I played during the introduction, and that is "I'm in the Mood for Swing," the 1980, 85 or 87 version. Margaret wrote, she said, a dumb question. Now, as we all know, there's no such thing as a dumb question. There's only a dumb answer, which I will give you. No, I'm joking. I feel like I've seen a lot of record labels that say foxtrot. Do they ever use other dances to describe the tune? No, foxtrot was, it's that standard dance that people do, holding each other on the dance floor. And it was just a generic term for pretty much any jazz record. Maybe a very slow one. I'm not sure if they put foxtrot on it, they might. But if the tempo is anywhere from, slow, medium up through almost supersonic, they'll just say foxtrot. It was just a convention of the day. It did not mean that was the only dance that could be danced to it. And certainly the jazz-oriented swing dancers and jitterbugs were doing all kinds of crazy dancing to it. And again, I mentioned who was in this photo. I only mentioned the two people who were on the recording that we heard, because this photo is indeed from another contemporaneous session, and that was Roy Eldridge on the trumpet and Billie Holiday. I could name all the other players, but they weren't on the record that we listened to, so I will refrain from doing that. As we move ahead, here we have Benny Carter, early in 1939, putting together a big band, hoping that he'll succeed with his big band like all his peers did, and we'll see. It was one of the great musical bands of the era. It was the kind of band that if you made it in his band, it was kind of like a stamp of approval. Musicians would sometimes turn down better paying gigs to be in Benny Carter's band because it was like a music lesson every night. And the arrangements were of such consistently high quality that as a musician, it's like a play, I guess, an actor or actress wanting to do only the best playwrights or something like that. By the way, if you look carefully, I can tell you two people who are in this photo that were significant in Benny Carter's band. The light complected tenor sax player just to Benny's right, our left, that's Ernie Powell, who we heard play that beautiful solo. The guy playing the trombone with his cheeks distended is Tyree Glenn, who also played vibes. And to his left, sitting down, was a favorite of all the musicians of that era, the great Vic Dickinson. Now look at Benny there. He's holding his alto sax. There's a clarinet and a trumpet, and we are going to hear at least a whole bunch of trumpet playing from Benny Carter in the show. Let's go live to the stage of the Savoy Ballroom and listen to this music.
But the program originating at the Savoy Ballroom, the home of Happy Feet, here in Harlem in New York City. We're reaching way over that stack over in the corner with the dust on it this time, and deep down the bottom of that stack is a grand old tune. Benny Carter gives it a new dress, of course, and plays it in modern style. Lady, Be Good.
Benny's theme song. It's called Melancholy Lullaby.
Theme, ladies and gentlemen, Melancholy Lullaby. Time once again to cut short another visit with Benny Carter, his trumpet, his saxophone, and his orchestra. The program originating in the Savoy Ballroom, the home of Happy Feet up here in Harlem, in New York City. Featured vocalist this afternoon was Mercedes.
You know, it's hard to overstate the importance of theme songs for big bands back in those years because, you know, they broadcast on the radio virtually every night. And that's how people would identify which band was playing. You know, they'd hear the theme song and they would always associate the theme song with the band at the beginning and the end of the broadcast. So, you know, it was a significant thing. It was more than just a song played at the beginning and end. It had a lot to do with people's conception about the band, the tune that they picked for a theme song. And that's a beautiful Benny Carter melody with that mellifluous saxophone playing. Well, we heard pretty much an up-tempo version of Lady Be Good. I mentioned before that Tyree Glenn, who's playing the trombone in that picture, played the vibes. And if his vibes playing sounded like Lionel Hampton to you a little bit, there's no surprise because he actually played trombone and vibes in a very early Lionel Hampton band out on the West Coast before Lionel Hampton joined Benny Goodman. And there was, you know, an incredible saxophone short, 16-bar, writing for the saxophones with Benny Carter playing the lead, playing that incredibly fast, articulate, clean saxophone. But anyway, so there's the sound of Benny's band, and he was going to stick with his big band for a couple of years. Then, as we'll discover, he was going to give it up and just have a small band. And big bands were such a headache. And unless your band was very successful, they usually wound up kind of bankrupting the band leader. Teddy Wilson, Jack Teagarden, any number of people who were among the greatest players of the era, really, you know, lost their shirts trying to keep a big band together. Okay, so that's the sound of Benny's big band. Throughout 1939 and 1940, they made many great records. We're going to hear several of them in the course of this presentation. Here's one. Here's a tune that it's almost like with Ellington. You know, Ellington had all these wonderful things that he recorded once, never went back to, that anybody else would have, if they were lucky enough to have written it, played it the rest of their lives. Here's a great piece by Benny from, well, actually, you have a playlist, as I understand it. So you have the recording dates and of all these things. So anyway, here's Benny Carter and a tune that very few people know, Shuffle Bug Shuffle. Can't get enough of that. Whoop. Yeah. And by the way, that sound you hear, these recordings we're listening to are actual copies of the original 78s. And just to let you know that a well-preserved, excellent condition 78 record, you know, those 78 RPM records, that's in good condition, played with optimum equipment, it's still the best way to listen to that music, better than pretty much any CD or other way of listening to it. There's more sound in there. And that was an example of that. And you can listen to them yourself. I get many of these from a free website. It's called Internet Archive, one word, internetarchive.org. And they have a wonderful series that they've done of, I don't know what the number, it has to be thousands, maybe 10,000, an incredible number of 78 RPM recordings transferred by George Flood's company in excellent fidelity. You can download them, you can listen to them, and that's one of those rabbit holes, you know, you might go there and never come back out. The outstanding piano there, and this is someone who really made his name with Benny Carter's big band, is Eddie Haywood. His name is not talked about that much, but he was a very innovative and original jazz pianist in the early 1940s, made great records with Billie Holiday and Coleman Hawkins, among others. Then he had his own band. And he played a wonderful, unusual solo there. He also played a brief solo on the Lady Be Good on that broadcast. I think that was probably Mouse Randolph on the trumpet, but of all the great solos, Benny on the alto sax when he came in there. You know, that's one of those records that really, again, has a lot to do with what made him so great as an improviser and as a composer, was that his writing sounds improvised and his improvised solos sound composed, if that makes sense. They put together the nexus of spontaneity and pre-thought. And, you know, he comes in with solos like that. I mean, he's playing his own song, his own arrangement, and it just fits. And you know that he's making it up on the spot, but it hangs together so well. I could listen to that, you know. If we were hanging out at my house here right now, believe me, we would listen to this record 4 or 5 times in a row, but you can do that on your own. Jesus, you know, he wrote that and never played it again, as far as we know. I mean, you might have played it in that year with his band, but he never really came back to it. And that's a shame, because it's a classic. Given that Benny Carter had now been back in the States, he came back in the summer of 38. Now we are in early 1940. He's being voted as the #1 alto saxophonist in the major music magazines, which in those days really favored white artists. It wasn't until the Esquire magazine poll of 1943 that you actually had a poll where the majority of people who won the greatest jazz player awards were African Americans. It's amazing to see how things were in those days. Well, actually, when I say amazing, it's not surprising. However, this was a wonderful record date, and it was quite mixed. On the left, the bassist is Bob Haggart. The tenor saxophonist is Eddie Miller. He was from New Orleans, great tenor player. There's Benny Goodman. And in between Benny Goodman and Benny Carter, you can see a head back there. That's Charlie Christian, who had just come to New York a few months earlier, and he had already wound up winning a poll and being on this great record. Gene Krupa is on the drums. Jess Stacy was the pianist. And on this particular track, Harry James is the trumpeter. And they did a impromptu blues, just a little introduction and out and boom into solos. And everybody here improvises like we were talking about. The solos could be written in stone. They're so perfect. So let's hear Benny Carter on the alto with Charlie Christian and Benny Goodman and friends. All-Star Strut. Here's Benny. Jack Teagarden. Absolutely fascinating to hear Benny Carter in the middle of Jack Teagarden, Charlie Christian, Benny Goodman, and all the other great musicians on that record session. It also, again, just shows the position that he had in the music industry, how well respected he was. And I just love to look at that photo, just, how well dressed they all are, and the instruments and all that kind of stuff. All right, that's All Star Strut. Now, at the same time, just shortly after that record session was made, this record session was made. Same thing, small group of musicians linked in their careers. And here, everyone on the record session was a graduate of the Fletcher Henderson Band. And one of the first recordings that we heard in our series here was D Blues, D-E-E Blues, recorded in 1930, again, small group out of the Fletcher Henderson Band with Coleman Hawkins, who's here on the tenor sax. He was on that record date, and Bernard Addison on the guitar. And the name of the band was called the Chocolate Dandies, which is the kind of name that they would give, a major label would give an African-American band back in those days. In 1940, they got back together. They used the same name again. And it's some of the greatest small group, just improvised off the top of the head jazz that was ever recorded. The bassist here is John Kirby. Benny's on the alto. The guitarist is Bernard Addison, who we heard with Benny in Europe, because Bernard Addison eventually became the accompanist for the Mills Brothers. And while he was in Europe, he recorded with Benny Carter in 1936. The trumpeter is Roy Eldridge, and Coleman Hawkins is on the tenor. And in the far corner, you can see the drummer, and that is Big Sid Catlett. Usually this session, in terms of Benny Carter, it's usually talks about his solo on I Can't Give You Anything But Love. Excuse me, not I Can't Believe That You're in Love With Me, I'm sorry, of which there are two versions. And his solo on the version that came out has been justly celebrated, reissued, talked about. And I urge you to listen to it on your own. It's one of the great ones. But he also plays brilliantly on this tune. The name of the tune is called Smack. It has no melody. It's just boom, go. And Smack was the nickname of Fletcher Henderson. So here's Benny Carter kicking things off with this incredible band of the greatest improvisers of the era. Here it is. Absolutely amazing, just off the top of their heads, improvisation by this incredible band, all of whom, as I mentioned, had played with Fletcher Henderson, and all of whom really innovated. You have to remember, I mean, this is 1940, right? So, it was just 15 years since, Louis Armstrong, started making his Hot Five records. So, the whole evolution of the jazz language was still something quite new. And it's always amazing to me how quickly things progressed. And the fact, that we've listened to jazz improvisation for so many years, we hear the notes go by, we hear, the chords and the melodies, and we just say, yeah, sure, of course, that's how people improvise. And that's the way that the things are done. In 1940, this was fresh and new. And this is something, that we've hit upon more than once, which is trying to appreciate history going forward. And I won't talk about it much anymore because I've mentioned it so many times that nobody knew what was going to happen in the future. All these things became so much a part of jazz performance to this day, these approaches to the instruments and the way of playing chords and just the jazz sound. These are the people who created it. And listening to records like this, will never go out of fashion, and they're never dated. They're by definition modern. So I thought that was a point making. Juan, I just texted you a couple of things, and I'm wondering, would it be possible if I stop sharing for you to put those up on the screen?
Sure.
Okay.
It's just one, right?
How
many?
I thought there were two.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm just gonna open the other one. I didn't see the first one. Yeah, just give me a second.
Sure, of course.
Thank you.
Folks, I just wanted to share this with you because frankly, I swear I forgot about it. But because I know there are musicians out there who really want to study and non-musicians too, I mean, I like to read technical things about things that I'm not studied in. And so I get a lot of emails, not emails, but messages with really kind of like, musical questions. And sometimes I don't want to answer them only because it's a little too much of a digression. But you know what, Juan? It's cool. I'm going to hold it up here. Same difference. So no need to do it because this will be clearer than the pictures I sent you.
Okay.
This is a book that came out. I mean, this is not a plug because trust me, I get no money for this. This came out in 1996, and it was a Hal Leonard collection of Benny Carter solos. And they asked me to analyze them musically, a kind of a musicological analysis of them. And I'm just looking for the one this is the solo from that record date. I Can't Believe That You're in Love with Me. That was so great. And I kind of broke it down, what to listen for and where the notes are and the chords and all this kind of stuff. And then there's a wonderful transcription of the solo here, which you can play or not play. It's not easy to play. So I just thought I would mention that there are books like this. This is not the only one, but there are books of Benny Carter music. And also for the folks out there who actually play in big bands and are interested, you can purchase, legitimately, with the royalties going to the Carter estate, big band arrangements and study them and look at them and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's definitely a point worth making. Now, let me go back to my share screen here and we will get back into the prepared presentation. Okay. So now I want to play what some people regard as the Benny Carter big band arrangement. At the time, all the, Ellington and Basie and Goodman and just all the great big bands of 1940, 1941, they're making so many incredible records. And occasionally, some breakthrough that just everybody knew and was even in those days considered to be a classic. And this is one of them. This is Benny Carter's arrangement of Sleep. Now, Sleep had been played by what we used to call a Mickey Mouse band, which is a band that played kind of almost purposefully corny music. which a lot of people like to listen to. And their theme song was Sleep, and it was a waltz. It was da, 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 dee, dee, dee. It was a waltz. D, 1, 2, 3, 1, dee, 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 sleep. And I guess it would lull you to sleep. So Benny Carter got the idea to write an arrangement of Sleep. And he featured Coleman Hawkins on the tenor, Joe Thomas on the trumpet, Eddie Hayward on the piano, himself on the alto. And here is his version of this kind of lullaby waltz. Wow. The original Sleep. And remember, we talked about Ernie Powell, the tenor player who in Benny's big band, who we heard with Billie Holiday, who most folks have never heard of. The drummer, the drumming on that record is just phenomenal at that tempo. His name was Keg Purnell. And he didn't have much of a career out of the 1940s, but man, did he sound great. Anyway, that's a classic among classic of Benny Carter's. And the photo you're seeing there is Benny posing with his sax section. And by the way, Ernie Powell is the gentleman in the center of that photo. And on the right is Tyree Glenn. And this was an advertisement for Conn saxophones. Back in those days, a lot of great saxophone players played Conn, C-O-N-N. All right, let's hear some more music at this amazing period in Benny's career. Now, we heard Coleman Hawkins on that recording, Sleep. And I'm just going to zero in here for a moment. We're going to jump up to the 1960s, just to kind of put things in context of Benny's life. He had first recorded with Coleman Hawkins back in the 20s, okay, with Fletcher Henderson's band. Actually, 1930, 1929, 28, 29, 30. Okay, so they met back then. And Carter, by his own admission, he's only 3 years younger than Coleman Hawkins. Hawkins is born in 1904. Benny is born in 1907. But he had this great quote Benny did about Coleman Hawkins saying, we all had people to copy from on records, in the early days. But who did Coleman Hawkins copy from? There was nobody playing the saxophone like he played it in those days. And we found out later that Coleman Hawkins was quite enamored of Bach, but that's another story. But so we heard them together. We saw a photo of them two together way back in the 20s. Here they are in 1940. Hawkins has a big band. He's going to try and make it with the big band. Benny Carter's going to try and make it with a big band. Hawkins pretty much gives it up within a year. He's just hemorrhaging money. Benny Carter sticks with it for the most part and then gets rid of it and goes out to Hollywood. And 26 years later, 27 years later, they wind up together on a tour of Europe with Teddy Wilson on the piano, Bob Cranshaw. You may know from his great records with so many people, including Sonny Rollins, Louis Bellson on drums, and Coleman Hawkins and Benny Carter together. And I think it's something just to see them together at this stage, at the last stage, because Coleman Hawkins died just a couple of years later. But here they are, playing Edgar Sampson's Blue Lou. Oops. Let's see. It's supposed to play. Damn it. Hold on. There we go. Sorry. The video quality is not great, but you can see and hear everything. so many historic links. Just a recording like that goes by, and you can't help but think about, Hawkins and Carter, as I mentioned before, together in the Fletcher Henderson Band, recording with Django Reinhardt. Remember how we heard those records in the 1930s? The bassist Bob Cranshaw had been on the wonderful record of Coleman Hawkins and Sonny Rollins just a few years earlier. Teddy Wilson had recorded Blue Lou with Benny Carter, the first record of it, back in 1933. Louis Bellson on drums, among other things, had been on an incredible trio session with Benny Carter and Art Tatum in the 1950s. So there's, a band of seemingly just thrown together of, incredible friendships and musical friendships and associations. Benny Carter kept his big band together, as I mentioned, up through, on and off, but pretty much up through 1945, 1946. This is a wonderful piece that he recorded. It's called Pom Pom. And, I want to listen to it because it's indicative of the super high quality of his big band. And the big band did not catch on commercially. And it just goes to show that sometimes, you can cast, pearls before swine? I don't know if that quite works, but, the public just, combination of marketing, Lord knows what it was. His band should have been as famous as any of the great bands, because there were a lot of very famous bands that couldn't tie Benny Carter's band's shoes, if that makes any sense. Here's just one of another series of Carter masterpieces, Pom Pom. That's Benny on the clarinet. That's Keg Purnell again on the drums. Remember, we talked about him before. That Benny Carter with beautiful clarinet work. I mean, what a gorgeous tone. We heard a bit of him on All of Me on the previous show. But anyway, gorgeous clarinet work, trumpet by Shad Collins. And anyway, wonderful. And, with Benny Carter, just to kind of define a little bit about what it is that makes this stuff like Musical Pearls. It's a combination. It's a combination of the orchestration, which is how the music sounds. That's all it is. You know, you've got the trumpets, the trombones, the saxophones, the rhythm section, and how do you put them together so they sound pleasing? There's a kind of a basic way to do it. Most big bands sound like the basic way. Ellington, I would be at the far extreme of eccentricity, you know, in terms of just hardly ever doing things the normal way. But Benny Carter had a way of doing things that it's hard to describe except just to say it sounds beautiful. It sounds natural. The way that he wrote the music, and I know because I played some of it with him, it played itself, if you know what I mean. We talked about this when we talked about his innovative saxophone writing that he did back in the early 1930s, that, you know, was he the only one to have the idea to write fancy stuff for saxophones? No. But he was the only one, a great saxophonist who learned how to do it so that the part that everybody played was natural. That's the only way that I can put it. So it's a combination of the orchestration and also of his ideas. Some people have great musical ideas, but they're not orchestrated well. And some people, like the classical composer Rimsky-Korsakov, you might know that name. He wrote a couple of famous pieces of music, but he was more famous for the way his music sounded than for the actual music he wrote, if that makes any sense. Benny Carter was someone who was a master of both. By the way, that photo that you're looking at where he's talking to a particularly fetching young fan was taken at the Apollo Theater. I thought you would enjoy that. He gave up the big band for a moment. 1941 into 42, he shucked it. He was going to come back to it pretty soon, but he shucked it because it was just too much money and too much of a headache. And he took a wonderful small band, mostly of musicians from his big band, into a place called Kelly's Stables, a famous small jazz club, nightclub on West 52nd Street that was known as Swing Street back in those days. Coleman Hawkins was playing there when he made Body and Soul. Lester Young's first band played at Kelly Stables. Nat Cole became famous there. It was a very, very great place. Well, anyway, there's a small band. And during the course of this band's stay, his trumpet player, whose name was Rustell Reese, who also played with Earl Hines' big band, went out. And who came in to sub but this guy? Look on the left. There's Benny leading the band. Al Gibson is on the clarinet. And there's the young Dizzy Gillespie on the trumpet. In fact, you can tell that Dizzy was just sitting in because he's not wearing the same band uniform as everyone else. Benny Carter and Dizzy Gillespie had already recorded together as far back as 1939. And you might remember during the show that we did about Benny's years in Europe, we listened to When Lights Are Low, that he recorded with Dizzy and Charlie Christian and Lionel Hampton back in 1939. They had a friendship that went right up till Dizzy's passing in the early 1990s. And there's a wonderful photo taken, I believe, I think some folks say it's at the White House. I don't believe so. I think it's at Yale University. I'll have to check my Berger book. But there's Dizzy on the left with his Baha'i thing around his neck. There's Dizzy's Benny saying something, and the man in between them was a great composer whose name should be better known, his music should be better known. He was a close friend of both of them. His name was Hale Smith. But anyway, just underlining the great friendship of Dizzy and Benny that went back to when Dizzy was totally unknown, and they remained very close right up until the end. Now we have a series of tunes, and you know the time is going. We are going to go to 9 o'clock tonight, and I will pick up next week where we left off. I think next week's show is The King and Me or something, or my years with the King, in which I was going to tell my play some music and just talk about my personal experiences with Benny Carter that I think are not as important as getting through his life story. So we'll pick up with the chronology next week, and then at the tail end of that fifth week, I'll do a short little segment on my memories of how lucky I was to be around such a great man as Benny Carter. A couple of questions here from Marcy. Did Benny ever play the flute? I don't think so. I'll have to dig deep into the Benny Carter books. I'm sure he never recorded on it. I know he recorded on the soprano sax, the alto sax, the tenor sax. If I'm not mistaken, a couple of the lower saxes a couple of times. He played a trombone solo on record with the blues vocalist Julia Lee. in 1947, I believe it was. And he played the piano on records. So he played a lot of instruments. I don't believe there's a flute recording. Here, I'm going to show you some titles. We're not going to listen to them all, but just some Benny Carter originals that he recorded in 1940, 1941 for the Victor label, all of which are masterpieces, and two of which never even came out in those days. And it just boggles the mind with all the, musical dross that was being issued by the major labels in those days. I mean, just absolutely trite stuff, looking for hit records. And such beautiful Benny Carter tunes. I think what we'll do is we'll listen to the two that weren't issued back in those days. You listen to this one and say, how could they not put it out? It's called Every Goodbye Ain't Gone. And here it is, some Benny Carter that didn't see the light of day for decades. Wow. What a masterpiece. Just can't understand why they didn't put that record out. It might have been a huge hit. Anyway, regardless, it's part of Benny Carter's great legacy. That very oddly odd sounding, beautiful trumpet solo was by the New Orleans trumpeter Sidney DeParis, who played, with a plunger mute, using his hand and or a derby or a mute. And he did it in a way that was different than anyone else. He has his own sound, Sidney DeParis, fascinating musician. And again, Benny with another one of those classic solos. A couple of sessions later, he did, this is a great track. We're not going to listen to it, but when we're done, I urge you all go onto YouTube or whatever your music sources, maybe you have the recordings at home, and listen to the wonderful record of Midnight that Benny did where he featured the great vocalist Maxine Sullivan. It's gorgeous. Whoops, I'm sorry. Okay. This did come out back in those days. And in fact, I'll tell you what, we will listen to, there's not that much time left. How about I stop talking and we listen to two in a row? My favorite blues with Benny, and then one that didn't come out. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'll reverse the order only because one is slow and one is fast. This is Lullaby to a Dream, Benny on the trumpet. This never came out. And then we'll hear my favorite blues, which did come out to kind of put a cap on the early big band years of Benny Carter. some of the greatest music of the era. Benny Carter playing the trumpet on both those tracks, and the ballad playing on Lullaby to a Dream. It's also beautiful. The Teddy Wilson-like piano was by Sonny White, and Vic Dickinson played the trombone solo on that last one. I'm not going to name all the soloists right now, but just Benny Carter. And again, in retrospect, you know, an early part of his career, you know, he had another 50 years, 60 years to go when he made these records. But what a pleasure it was this evening to go through them all with you and kind of just get deep into his accomplishments at this very important juncture in his career, where he was headed towards Hollywood, as we mentioned. Well, thank you all for sticking around so late. I enjoyed all the questions. Oh, last question. Sue had a question about how big did a big band have to be called a big band? In the early 1930s, it would be probably about 10 musicians. And by the time you get to 1940, I mean, you could have a smaller band, but the standard sized big band around 1940 would be about 14 or 15 people. And then by the end of the 1940s, when big bands went the way of the dodo bird, you know, they had gotten even bigger. But I would say roughly, I'd say, you know, about 10 to 12 pieces would be the minimum for what we would call a big band. Anyway, thank you all. And I'll see you all next Friday night at the same time. Stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.